Robert never expected his life to change when he got the keys to his great-aunt's old house. The 45-year-old electrician had been living in a small apartment for years, working long hours to make ends meet. When the lawyer called to tell him about the inheritance, it felt like a miracle. His great-aunt Clara had left him her entire property in rural Pennsylvania, a beautiful colonial house built in the 1940s. The house had been empty for 3 years after Clara passed away. Robert remembered visiting her as a child, but those memories were fuzzy. He recalled the smell of fresh cookies and the way sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Now, standing in front of the house as an adult, he felt both excited and nervous. The first week was busy. Robert spent his days cleaning, unpacking his belongings, and getting familiar with every corner of his new home. The house was much bigger than his apartment. It had 3 bedrooms, a large living room, a spacious kitchen, and a basement that seemed to go on forever. Everything was old, but well-maintained. Clara had clearly taken good care of the place. Robert loved the peaceful feeling of living in the countryside. After years of city noise, car horns, sirens, and neighbors arguing, the quiet was like a gift. He could hear birds singing in the morning and crickets at night. For the first time in years, he slept deeply. But during his second week in the house, something changed. It started on a Tuesday night. Robert was lying in bed, almost asleep, when he heard a soft scratching sound coming from somewhere inside the walls. At first, he thought he was imagining it. The old house was probably just settling, he told himself. Old houses make all kinds of sounds, but the scratching continued. It wasn't random or occasional. It sounded deliberate, like something was moving with purpose through the walls. Robert sat up in bed and listened carefully. The sound seemed to be coming from the area near his bedroom, but then it moved. Slowly, it traveled along the wall, disappeared for a moment, and then started again from a different location. The next night it happened again. This time Robert was ready. He grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound through the house. The scratching started in the basement, moved up through the first floor, and then seemed to go up to the second floor. It was like something was making a journey through the entire house, following a specific path. Robert's first thought was, obvious rats. Old houses in the countryside often had rodent problems. It made perfect sense. The house had been empty for 3 years, giving plenty of time for a family of rats to move in and make themselves comfortable. They had probably built nests in the walls, and were now exploring their territory every night. The next morning, Robert drove to the hardware store in town. He bought rat traps, poison, and mesh wire to block any holes he might find. The store clerk, an older man with kind eyes, nodded knowingly when Robert explained his problem. Yeah, old houses can be tricky, the clerk said. Rats are smart creatures. They learn the layout of a house and create regular routes. They'll need to be patient and strategic. Robert spent the afternoon setting up traps throughout the house. He placed them in the basement, along the walls on the first floor, and even in the attic. He checked for holes or cracks where rats might be getting in and sealed them with steel wool and caulk. He felt confident that his problem would be solved within a few days, but the scratching sounds continued every night. After a week of unsuccessful trapping, Robert called a professional exterminator. The man arrived the next day with special equipment and years of experience. He spent 2 hours examining the house, checking the traps, and looking for signs of rodent activity. This is strange, the exterminator said, scratching his head. I don't see any droppings, no chewed materials, no nests. Usually when you have rats, you see evidence everywhere. But your house is clean. The exterminator set up more sophisticated traps and monitoring devices. He promised to return in a week to check on the results. But Robert already felt worried. What if it wasn't rats? What else could be making those sounds? His friend Mike offered to bring over his cat Whiskers for a weekend. Mike insisted that cats were natural rat hunters, and that Whiskers would solve the problem quickly. Robert agreed, hoping that a different approach might work. Whiskers was a large orange cat with keen hunting instincts. Robert watched as the cat explored the house, sniffing every corner and listening carefully to every sound. But something strange happened. Instead of showing excitement or hunting behavior, Whiskers seemed confused. The cat would approach certain walls, meow softly, and then back away. It was like the cat could sense something but couldn't understand what it was. On Saturday night, when the scratching sound started, Robert watched Whiskers closely. Cat's ears perked up, and it followed the sound through the house, just like Robert had been doing. But instead of trying to catch whatever was making the noise, Whiskers just sat and stared at the walls with a puzzled expression. Even the cat. "Is confused," Robert told Mike the next morning. "This is getting weird." By the third week, Robert had started keeping a notebook. He was an electrician, used to solving problems through careful observation and logical thinking. If he couldn't catch whatever was making the sounds, maybe he could at least understand the pattern. Every night he wrote down the exact time the scratching started and ended. He noted which walls were involved and in what order. He drew a simple map of the house and marked the path the sound seemed to follow. The results were surprising. The scratching always started at exactly 11:47 p.m. and lasted for exactly 23 minutes. It always followed the same route through the house, starting in the basement and moving systematically through each floor. The timing was so precise that Robert could set his watch by it. This discovery made Robert more curious than scared. Rats didn't follow schedules. They didn't move in perfectly timed patterns. Whatever was making these sounds was either very unusual or wasn't rats at all. Robert began to feel like a detective working on a mystery. During the day, he examined the walls more carefully, looking for any clues about what might be behind them. He used his electrical knowledge to study the wiring and notice some interesting things. Some of the electrical work looked newer than the rest of the house, as if modifications had been made years after the original construction. One evening, as Robert was following the scratching sounds with his flashlight, something different happened. The sound led him to the basement, to a section of wall that looked identical to all the others. But this time, the scratching seemed to be coming from directly behind that specific wall. Not above it, not below it, but right behind it. Robert pressed his ear against the wall and listened carefully, and the sound was clearer here, more defined. It definitely wasn't coming from a small space, like the inside of a wall. It sounded like it was coming from a larger area, maybe even a room. But that was impossible. Robert had examined the house's layout carefully. There was no room behind that wall. According to the house's structure, there should be nothing there but the foundation. As Robert stood in the basement that night, listening to the mysterious scratching sounds coming from behind an impossible wall, he realized that his quiet country life was about to become much more complicated. Something was hidden in his house, something that had been waiting for 3 years to be discovered. The scratching sounds stopped at exactly 12:10 a.m., just as they had every night for the past 3 weeks. But this time, Robert didn't go back to bed. Instead, he stood in the basement, staring at the wall and wondering what secrets his grit-aunt Clara had left behind. The next morning, Robert couldn't stop thinking about what he had experienced in the basement. He had barely slept, his mind racing with questions. Over coffee, he stared at the notebook where he had been recording the mysterious sounds. The pattern was too perfect to be natural. Something was definitely not right. Robert decided to approach this like any electrical job he had ever worked on. When there was a problem with wiring, you didn't just guess. You investigated systematically. You traced every wire, checked every connection, and looked for anything that didn't belong. He would apply the same method to his house. Armed with his flashlight, measuring tape, and electrical tools, Robert went back to the basement. In the daylight streaming through the small windows, everything looked normal. The walls were painted white, probably decades ago, and showed the usual signs of age: small cracks, slight discoloration, and the musty smell that old basements always have. But Robert was looking with different eyes now. As an electrician, he had learned to notice details that most people missed. He started examining the electrical outlets, light switches, and the way the wiring ran through the basement. That's when he noticed something odd. The electrical system in most of the basement followed a logical pattern. The main electrical panel was in one corner, and wires ran from there to various outlets and light fixtures in straight, efficient lines. But in the section of wall where he had heard the scratching, the wiring took an unusual detour. Instead of running straight across, The wires curved around that area, as if they were avoiding something. Robert traced the wiring with his flashlight, following each wire carefully. Most of the electrical work looked original to the house, probably installed in the 1940s. But some sections looked newer, like they had been added or modified years later. Someone had clearly done electrical work in this basement after the house was built. This discovery made Robert more curious. Why would someone change the wiring? And why would they make it curve around that particular section of wall? He started measuring the basement, creating a rough map of the space. When he compared his measurements to what he remembered of the house's exterior, something didn't add up. The basement seemed smaller than it should be. According to his calculations, there should be about 8 feet more space behind the wall where he had heard the scratching. But when he walked around the outside of the house, he couldn't see any sign of an additional room or structure. Robert needed more information. Decided to visit the local historical society, which was housed in a small building in the town center. The elderly woman at the front desk, Mrs. Henderson, had lived in the area her entire life and knew the history of almost every house in the county. "Oh, you're Clara's great-nephew," Mrs. Henderson said with a warm smile. "She was such a wonderful woman, always helping people, always involved in community projects. We miss her terribly." Robert explained that he was trying to learn more about the house's history, particularly any renovations or changes that might have been made over the years. Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with interest. "Clara was very active in the 1940s and 1950s, she said, pulling out a thick folder of old photographs and documents. "She was involved in several charitable organizations. Let me see what I can find about your house." As Mrs. Henderson searched through the files, she shared stories about Clara that Robert had never heard. His grandaunt had been much more involved in the community than he had realized. She had organized fundraisers, helped new families settle in the area, and had been particularly active in helping people who had nowhere else to turn. "Here's something interesting," Mrs. Henderson said, holding up an old photograph. This was taken in 1947 at a community meeting. Clara was helping to organize support for families who had come to the area after the war. Many of them were refugees who had lost everything and needed temporary shelter while they got back on their feet. Robert studied the photograph. His grandaunt looked young and determined, standing with a group of other volunteers. The caption mentioned that local families had opened their homes to provide temporary housing for people in need.
Oh.
Did Clara house people in her home? Mrs. Henderson nodded. "Oh yes, she was one of the most generous hosts. She always said that her big house was meant to be shared. I remember hearing that she had made some modifications to her home to accommodate guests more comfortably, but I don't know the details." Robert thanked Mrs. Henderson and left the Historical Society with his mind spinning. The pieces were starting to come together. Clara had housed refugees in the 1940s. She had modified her house to accommodate them. And someone had changed the electrical wiring in the basement. Back at home, Robert returned to the basement with renewed purpose. He began examining the walls more carefully, looking for any signs of modification or construction. He tapped on different sections, listening for changes in sound that might indicate hollow spaces or different materials. Most of the basement walls sounded solid, but the section where he had heard the scratching sounded different. When he tapped on it, the sound was slightly muffled, as if there was something behind the wall that was absorbing the sound. Robert got his drill and made a small hole in the wall, just big enough to shine his flashlight through. What he saw made his heart race. Behind the wall, there was definitely a space. Not just the inside of a wall, but what looked like a narrow passageway. The discovery was both exciting and concerning. Robert realized that his house contained a secret that had been hidden for decades. But he also knew that he needed to be careful. If someone had gone to the trouble of concealing this space, there might be a good reason. Robert spent the rest of the day researching his house's architectural plans at the county office. The official blueprints showed a standard basement layout with no mention of any hidden spaces or passages. But Robert noticed that the plans were dated 1941. And he now knew that modifications had been made after that date. That evening, Robert called his friend Mike and told him about his discoveries. Mike was fascinated and offered to help with the investigation. Together, they developed a plan to carefully explore the hidden space without damaging the house's structure. You need to be careful, Mike warned. If this space has been sealed for decades, it might not be safe.
Oh.
There could be structural issues, bad air, or other problems. Robert agreed, but he also knew that he couldn't ignore what he had found. The scratching sounds were still happening every night, and now he was certain they were coming from behind the false wall. Something or someone was in that hidden space, and Robert was determined to find out what it was. As he prepared for bed that night, Robert felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow he would begin the careful process of removing the false wall and exploring the secret passage. After 3 weeks of mystery, he was finally close to finding answers. But he also had a feeling that whatever he discovered would change everything he thought he knew about his Grat and Clara and the house he had inherited. The quiet country life he had been enjoying was about to become an adventure he never could have imagined. Robert woke up early the next morning, his mind already focused on the task ahead. He had barely slept, thinking about the hidden passageway behind his basement wall. After a quick breakfast, he gathered his tools and prepared for what might be the most important day since moving into the house. Mike arrived at 9 o'clock, bringing additional tools and a portable worklight. The two friends had worked together on many projects over the years, and Robert trusted Mike's practical approach to problem solving. They both understood that removing a wall, even a false one, required patience and careful planning. "Remember, we're not trying to demolish anything," Robert told Mike as they headed down to the basement. "We want to see what's behind there without destroying whatever Clara built." They started by carefully removing the white paint from a small section of the wall. Underneath, they found wood paneling that had been expertly installed to match the rest of the basement. But when they looked closely, they could see that this section had been added later. The wood was slightly different in color and texture from the original basement walls. Working slowly and methodically, Robert and Mike began removing the false paneling. Each piece came off carefully, revealing the construction underneath. It was clear that whoever had built this had been skilled and thoughtful. The false wall wasn't just a quick cover-up. It was professionally constructed to blend seamlessly with the original basement. Behind the paneling, they found a narrow opening, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Robert shined his flashlight into the space and saw that it led to a corridor about 3 feet wide and 6 feet high. The walls were made of the same stone as the basement foundation, but the passage had been carved out deliberately. "This is incredible," Mike whispered, leaning over Robert's shoulder to peer into the passage. "Someone put a lot of work into this. This isn't just a hiding place. It's like a secret tunnel." Robert felt his heart beating faster as he prepared to enter the passage. He had brought a powerful flashlight, his cell phone for emergencies, and a small toolkit. Mike would stay in the basement to help if anything went wrong. The passage was narrow but well constructed, as Robert crawled through it. He could see that the walls had been reinforced with wooden beams, and the floor had been covered with old wooden planks. Someone had clearly spent considerable time and effort making this passage safe and functional. After about 10 feet, the passage opened into a slightly wider area. Robert stood up carefully, his flashlight revealing that he was in a small chamber, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet. But this wasn't the end of the passage. There was another opening leading further into the darkness. "How are you doing in there?" Mike called from the basement. "I'm fine," Robert called back. "The passage is well built. I'm going to keep exploring." Robert continued through the passage, which curved slightly to the right. The construction remained consistent: stone walls, wooden supports, and a wooden floor. He began to understand that this wasn't a simple hiding place. It was a carefully planned and executed construction project that had probably taken months to complete. After another 15 feet, Robert reached what appeared to be the end of the passage. Here, the space opened up into a small room about 6 feet by 6 feet. But what caught his attention immediately was what was in the floor: a wooden hatch. Built into the stone foundation, the hatch was about 3 feet square, made of heavy oak, with metal hinges and a complex locking mechanism. It looked old but well maintained, and Robert could see that it had been used recently. The metal hinges showed signs of regular use, and the wood around the handle was worn smooth from being touched many times. Robert knelt down and examined the hatch carefully. The locking mechanism was intricate, with multiple bolts and a central handle that seemed to control the entire system. But what made his blood run cold was the sound that was coming from below the hatch, the same scratching sound he had been hearing every night for 3 weeks. Whatever was making those sounds was directly below this hatch. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cell phone to call Mike, but before he could dial, the scratching sound changed. Instead of the random scratching he had been hearing, there was now a deliberate pattern: 3 short scratches, followed by 2 long ones, then 3 short scratches again. Robert realized that whatever was down there was trying to communicate. The sound wasn't random animal movement. It was someone or something sending a message. Mike, Robert called back through the passage, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "I need you to come in here. Bring the rope we brought and call 911. On your phone, tell them we might need emergency medical help." Robert heard Mike moving through the passage, and within a few minutes, his friend appeared in the small chamber. Mike's eyes widened when he saw the hatch and heard the scratching sounds coming from below. "What do you think is down there?" Mike asked quietly. "I don't know," Robert replied. "But whatever it is, it's been trying to get our attention for 3 weeks. And it's definitely not rats." The two friends examined the hatch mechanism together. It was designed to be opened from above, but something seemed to be wrong. The central handle turned, but the bolts weren't moving properly. The mechanism appeared to be jammed or broken. "Look at this," Mike said, pointing to scratches around the lock mechanism. "These marks are fresh. Someone has been trying to operate this lock recently, but it's not working properly." Robert made a decision. To open this hatch? Whatever is down there has been trapped for who knows how long. If it's a person, they might be in serious trouble. Working together, Robert and Mike applied steady pressure to the locking mechanism. The years had made the metal stiff, but gradually they felt it beginning to give way. With a loud click, the first bolt released, then the second. Finally, the third bolt slid back, and the hatch was unlocked. Robert positioned himself at one side of the hatch while Mike took the other. They looked at each other, both understanding that they were about to discover something that would change everything they thought they knew about this house. "On 3, Robert said quietly. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the heavy wooden hatch, and Robert immediately shined his flashlight down into the space below. What he saw made him gasp in shock and immediately spring into action. In the small chamber below, sitting against the stone wall, was an elderly man. He was conscious but clearly weak, his clothes dirty and his face showing signs of dehydration. When the light hit his face, he looked up at Robert with eyes that were both grateful and filled with relief. "Thank you," the old man whispered in a voice that was barely audible. "I thought no one would ever find me. I've been waiting for 4 days." Robert's training as an electrician had taught him to stay calm in emergencies. But nothing had prepared him for finding an elderly man trapped in a hidden chamber beneath his house. His hands shook as he quickly lowered himself down through the hatch opening to help the stranger. The chamber was about 8 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a wooden floor that had been carefully constructed decades ago. Despite being underground, the space was surprisingly dry and well ventilated. Robert could see small air vents built into the walls, showing that whoever had designed this place had thought about long-term habitability. "Sir, can you hear me?" Robert asked gently, kneeling beside the elderly man. "My name is Robert. We're going to get you out of here." The old man nodded weakly. His lips were cracked from dehydration, and his hands trembled as he tried to speak. "Water," he whispered. "Please, just a little water." Mike quickly passed down a bottle of water through the hatch opening. Robert helped the elderly man take small sips, being careful not to let him drink too quickly. As the man's condition stabilized slightly, Robert began to assess the situation. The chamber contained several interesting items. There was a small wooden chair, a table with some books, and what appeared to be a collection of personal belongings carefully arranged along one wall. But what struck Robert most was how clean and well-maintained everything was. This wasn't an abandoned space. Someone had been taking care of it regularly. "Help is coming," Robert assured the old man, as Mike called 911 from above. "Can you tell me your name? How long have you been down here?" The elderly man's eyes focused on Robert's face. "My name is Benjamin," he said, his voice getting slightly stronger with each sip of water. "I've been trapped here for 4 days. The mechanism broke when I tried to leave." Robert was confused. "You tried to leave? You mean you came here on purpose?" Benjamin nodded slowly. "I come here every month, for 40 years. But this time, the lock jammed, and I couldn't get out. I tried calling for help, but the walls are too thick. I thought I was going to die down here," Mike called down. "From above, the paramedics are on their way. They'll be here in about 10 minutes. Robert helped Benjamin sit up more comfortably against the wall. "Benjamin, I need to ask you something important. This is my house now. Inherited it from my great-aunt Clara. Did you know her?" At the mention of Clara's name, Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. "Clara," he whispered, "she saved my life. This place, she built this place to save people like me." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, people like you?" Benjamin took another sip of water and gathered his strength. "I was 12 years old when I first came to this house. It was 1947, and I had nowhere else to go. My family and I had come to America after the war, but we had no money, no home, and no one to help us. Clara opened her house to refugees like us." The pieces were starting to come together in Robert's mind. The Historical Society had mentioned that Clara helped refugees in the 1940s. The careful construction of the hidden chamber, the modifications to the house's electrical system. "You lived down here?" Robert asked gently. "For 6 months," Benjamin replied. "Clara built this place as a safe room for people who needed to hide. Sometimes it was families escaping difficult situations. Sometimes it was people who just needed time to get back on their feet. She never asked for anything in return."
Ow.
Benjamin gestured around the chamber. "She made sure we had everything we needed. Fresh air, clean water, books to read, and most importantly, safety. She told us that if we ever needed help again, we could always come back to this place." Robert noticed a small metal box on the table. "What's in there?" "Letters," Benjamin said with a small smile. "Letters from people who stayed here over the years. Clara kept them all. And after she passed away, I've been coming here to take care of this place. It's like a memorial to her kindness." Mike called down again. "Robert, the paramedics are here. They're bringing equipment to help get Benjamin out safely." Within minutes, the basement was filled with activity. The paramedics worked efficiently to assess Benjamin's condition and prepare him for transport. They lowered a stretcher through the hatch opening and carefully lifted Benjamin out of the chamber. As they prepared to take him to the hospital, Benjamin grabbed Robert's arm. "Please," he said urgently, "don't let them destroy this place. Clara made me promise to protect it. There are stories here, memories that need to be preserved." "I won't let anything happen to it," Robert assured him, "but I need to understand more. Will you tell me the rest of the story when you're feeling better?" Benjamin nodded gratefully as the paramedics carried him up from the basement. 2 hours later, Robert sat in the hospital waiting room, his mind racing with questions. The doctor came out to update him on Benjamin's condition. "He's going to be fine," the doctor said. "Mild dehydration and exhaustion, but nothing serious. He's remarkably healthy for a man of his age." When Robert was finally allowed to visit Benjamin, he found the old man sitting up in bed, looking much better after receiving fluids and medical care. Benjamin's eyes were bright and alert, and he seemed eager to talk. "I owe you my life," Benjamin said, as Robert sat down beside the bed. "But more than that, I owe you an explanation. Clara's house holds secrets that most people never knew about." Robert leaned forward. "I'm listening." "Clara didn't just help refugees after the war," Benjamin continued. "She was part of a network of people who helped anyone who needed protection. The chamber you found me in was one of several safe houses in this area. Clara coordinated the whole operation." Benjamin explained that Clara had carefully designed the hidden chamber to be completely self-sufficient. It had its own ventilation system, a small bathroom, and even a hidden entrance from outside the house that didn't require going through the main building. "For 20 years, Clara helped people," Benjamin said. "Families escaping violence, people hiding from those who wanted to hurt them, individuals who just needed time to heal and start over. She never kept records of who she helped, but she never forgot any of us. And you've been maintaining the chamber all these years? Robert asked. Clara gave me a key before she died, Benjamin replied. She made me promise to keep the chamber ready, just in case someone needed it again. She said that as long as there were people who needed help, this place should be available. Robert felt overwhelmed by the weight of what he had inherited. Benjamin, I had no idea. I thought I was just getting an old house. But Clara left me something much more important, didn't she? Benjamin smiled. She left you a legacy of helping others. The question is, what will you do with it? Robert drove home from the hospital that evening with his mind full of thoughts he never could have imagined just 1 week ago. Benjamin's words kept echoing in his head. She left you a legacy of helping others. The question is, what will you do with it? The house felt different now. As Robert walked through the rooms, he saw them through new eyes. This wasn't just his inherited home. It was a place where Clara had quietly changed dozens of lives. Every corner seemed to hold stories of courage, kindness, and hope that he was only beginning to understand. The next morning, Robert returned to the hidden chamber with a new sense of purpose. This time, he brought proper lighting and took time to carefully examine everything Benjamin had mentioned. The metal box on the table contained exactly what Benjamin had described. Dozens of handwritten letters from people who had found safety. In this room, Robert sat on the small wooden chair and began reading the letters. Each one told a different story. They all shared the same theme: gratitude for Clara's help during the darkest moments of their lives. Some letters were from families who had stayed in the chamber for weeks, while Clara helped them find permanent housing. Others were from individuals who had needed a safe place to heal from difficult situations. One letter particularly touched Robert's heart. It was from a young mother who had stayed in the chamber with her 2 small children in 1953, she wrote. Clara didn't just give us a place to hide. She gave us hope when we thought there was none left. She showed us that there are still good people in the world who will help strangers without asking for anything in return. Another letter was from a man who had written to Clara 20 years after staying in the chamber. He described how her help had allowed him to rebuild his life, start a family, and become successful in business.
Oh.
I think of you every day, he wrote. Because of your kindness, I learned how to be kind to others. As Robert read letter after letter, he began to understand the full scope of what Clara had accomplished. She hadn't just provided temporary shelter, she had created a network of hope that had touched hundreds of lives over the decades. Benjamin was released from the hospital 2 days later, and Robert invited him to come back to the house. Old Man moved slowly but determinedly through the basement and down into the chamber that had been his refuge as a child and his responsibility as an adult. This is where I learned what real kindness looks like, Benjamin said, running his hand along the stone wall. Clara taught me that helping others isn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It's about being willing to open your door when someone needs shelter. Robert made a decision that surprised even himself. Benjamin, I want to restore this place and keep Clara's mission alive, but I need your help. She did. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears of joy. You want to continue her work? I've been thinking about it nonstop since I found you, Robert said. Clara left me this house for a reason. Maybe she knew that someday someone would need what she built here. Over the following weeks, Robert and Benjamin worked together to restore the hidden chamber. They fixed the broken lock mechanism, improved the ventilation system, and made sure everything was safe and functional. Robert used his electrical skills to install better lighting and a communication system that would prevent anyone from being trapped again. But Robert wanted to do more than just maintain the chamber. He contacted Mrs. Henderson at the Historical Society and shared Clara's story. Together, they began documenting the history of Clara's network and the people she had helped. This is remarkable, Mrs. Henderson said as she read through the letters. Clara never talked about this work publicly. She just quietly helped people for decades without any recognition. Robert decided to transform part of his house into a small educational center where Clara's story could be shared with the community. He worked with local schools to create programs that would teach young people about kindness, courage, and the difference that one person can make. Benjamin became Robert's partner in this effort. Despite his age, he had energy and enthusiasm for preserving Clara's legacy. He began giving talks at schools and community centers, sharing his experiences and explaining how Clara's kindness had shaped his entire life. When I was a scared 12-year-old boy, Benjamin would tell students, "Clara showed me that even in the darkest times, there are people who will help. She taught me that we all have the power to be someone's hope." The story of Clara's hidden chamber began to attract attention from historians and educators across the region. Robert received calls from universities wanting to study Clara's methods and from other communities interested in creating similar programs. But what meant the most to Robert were the visits from some of the people who had stayed in the chamber. Decades earlier, word had spread through old networks, and elderly men and women began making pilgrimages to see the place that had sheltered them in their times of need. One afternoon, a woman in her 70s arrived at Robert's door with her adult children and grandchildren. "I stayed here with my mother in 1949, she explained. "I was only 8 years old, but I never forgot Clara's kindness. I wanted my family to see the place that changed our lives." As Robert showed the family through the chamber, he watched the woman's grandchildren listen in amazement to stories of their grandmother's childhood. The chamber had become a living classroom where lessons about compassion and courage were passed from one generation to the next. 6 months after finding Benjamin in the hidden chamber, Robert hosted the first annual Clara Memorial Day at the house. The event brought together dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Clara's work. There were elderly individuals who had once found shelter in the chamber, their children and grandchildren, and community members who wanted to learn about this hidden piece of local history. Benjamin, now healthy and energetic, served as the main speaker. Clara always said that kindness creates a ripple effect, he told the crowd gathered in Robert's backyard. One act of kindness leads to another, and another, until it touches lives that the original helper never even knew about. As the day ended and the last visitors left, Robert and Benjamin sat together in the chamber that had brought them together. The space felt peaceful and full of positive energy. "What do you think Clara would say if she could see what we've done?" Robert asked. Benjamin smiled. "I think she would say that the most important thing isn't what we've built or preserved. It's that we're ready to help the next person who needs it." That night, as Robert went to bed in his house, that no longer felt haunted by mysterious sounds, he realized that what had started as a simple inheritance had become the most meaningful work of his life. Clara had left him more than a house. She had left him a purpose.